Good evening. I'm compelled to talk about global tyranny, or rather, the threat of global tyranny that is facing us. If you listen to my videos, I speak a lot about Vladimir Putin's stronghold in Africa, which is the base for acquiring resources that he uses to fund his illegal war in Ukraine, which I believe he will take on further to the rest of Europe and the rest of the free world, thereby establishing a worldwide tyrannical government led by countries like China and Vladimir Putin's Russia. I mean, people who are friends with uh, North Korea. And just imagine a combination of North Korea, China, and Russia running the world. That is a very scary thought. Now, I've been looking at these global connections that are forming this club of evil men whom I have decided to call the Antichrist, because as I see it now, they really are the Antichrist. What is an Antichrist? The Antichrist is a spirit, it's not a person. Unlike what other people like to say, when they look for the Antichrist, they will think that, oh, there's a certain particular person who's going to rule the world. But the Bible speaks about the spirit of the Antichrist, which means that each generation will have to deal with characters through whom the spirit of the Antichrist wants to express itself through. Sometimes it is one individual, sometimes it is a group of individuals. And at the present moment, the spirit of the Antichrist is in the group or individuals that want to dislodge the good global order. Now, we have a global order that is led by strong institutions, strong democratic nations that promote human rights, that promote human prosperity, uh, and uplifting people out of poverty. It's not perfect. The reason why it's not perfect because it is run by human beings, not Jesus Christ himself. Therefore, the human factor comes in there. So, however, it is a holy thing that God has, that He has established on the earth, that keeps our globe to be at peace ever since the Second World War. And I have been saying on this channel that the United States is the country, okay, though there's many countries around the world, it is the country that is leading. Just like at school, we have got a head boy. All students are students, but there's one student who is the head boy. Does that mean that student is more student than others? No, he's still a student. However, they've got a role of being a leader of students. In the same way, all countries have and should maintain their sovereignty against all other nations. However, the United States becomes therefore the sort of like what we normally call the global police. We normally talk of the US hegemony, which some people do not like. It's like at school, people are revolting against the head boy, people revolting against the upper class or the prefect or whatever. So that is what you get with things like BRICS, whereby they feel like they need to come up with their own currency to counter US hegemony. I mean, I know the story. When I was in high school, who did the same thing. We just didn't like the head boys and all those boys who thought that they were better than everybody else. So we suddenly decided to vote for a guy that we knew that is at the bottom of the ladder, just for fun, just to spite those boys who think that they're better than anybody else. Anyway, that was just fun. It's got nothing to do with Christ or Antichrist. It was just a fun way of just saying, screw you, you think you're better than us. So, but then you see now, I'm seeing in the world that there's this revolt against the United States. Perhaps the United States deserves it because of some of the things that they have done, or some of the prideful actions, or some of the wanton disregard for other nations. For example, in the Caribbean or in Africa or in black countries, they seem to have more looked more in white oriented countries and helped them become better. In other nations that are black run, they have led to be run by bad leaders, and therefore the prefect, which is the United States, has failed in that regard, and therefore has to step up. But then you see again now in this globe where there's this global tyranny that is coming up, the bad actors led by Russia and China. These countries, most of them are in Africa and in the Caribbean and in South America. These countries that have not developed their democracies. And one could argue and justifiably argue that they could have been democratic and been led well, but sometimes when the good leaders arise, the CIA will come and kill those leaders. For example, we know about Congo when what's his name? The name just doesn't. Okay, the Congolese leader, he was allegedly killed by the CIA. Talk about Thomas Sankara. Talk about the name of this Congolese leader cannot come to my mind. If I remember it, I will write it in the comments below. The one that I'm talking about, the one who was assassinated. Yeah, Jesus, what's the name? Oh, let me just leave it. But we you do what know what I'm talking about when we've got these African leaders who love country, who love their people. In South Africa, we'll talk about people like Steve Biko, who all of a sudden die, and then a tyranny comes in. Yet we have got the United States, which is a global police, and it is fingered by other people. It's fingered that it's America that actually facilitates or allows the killing of these good leaders. Perhaps they thought that it's a competitive advantage to carry on being the head boy of the world. Now, that is the sinful nature of the United States. That is the man part. But there is a God part. The God part is that they are the ones that God chose to be the global leaders. And therefore, they need, therefore, to come right and do righteously. Because if they do not do that, then the Antichrist will begin to arise. So the United States is not the Antichrist, but the Antichrist, the spirit, can work within United States, within the political system of the United States, and it can fully be expressed in other political systems in other countries that seek to overtake the United States, not so that they can replace the United States and lead the world better, no, but so that they can put a global or install a global tyranny. How can you see that? You can see how Russia runs its country. You can see how China runs its country. And therefore, you know that as they seek to challenge the US hegemony, you do know that whatever oppression or oppressive nature that they are in their countries, they are going to they are going to transmit it to the rest of the world. Let's talk about things like racism. The United States also had a problem with racism in the past, but we see leaders like Abraham Lincoln who fought part of this war of liberating black people. We see a time when the United States, we've got this Malcolm X and Martin Luther, and then we get to a place where we actually get black people get rights, and we ended up having Barack Obama, the first black American uh, black African American leader of the United States. So you can see that progress has happened in there, and that is why they are still leading the world. As I said, that leaders of the world is led by people, not by God. So human beings have got that human nature, but you can see progress in there. Unlike in China and Russia, where racism is blatant, black people are hated. As a black person, I cannot support a globe that is led by China in Russia, knowing very well that they hate black people, they hate people like me, and they will have no interest whatsoever about what I care or what I need or my case or my needs. They will just want to use me and send me to servitude. But however, the United States is not perfect, but we do know and we have seen through evidence that the United States does repent of its sins and does try to come along and respect the weaker people, the weaker classes. We can even talk about employment opportunities. Let's talk about the border policies. When we talk about the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe that have opened their borders to the refugees of Syria, refugees of Africa, refugees of the Caribbean, who have become workers in the United States and they've become the diaspora for all of these nations, sending money home, supporting the supporting the weak economies back home. But I do not see Zimbabweans or Zambians or people from the Caribbean or Syria who, when they are running away from Bashir al-Assad or running away from Emerson Mnangagwa's terrible policy, I don't see them going to Russia to look for a job. I don't see them going to China to look for jobs because they do understand that there's no life in China, there's no life in Russia. See, since there's no life for anybody who is not Chinese in China, there's no life for anybody who's not Russian in Russia. What makes you think in your mind that when these guys run the world, they will create life for everyone else? They will suck the living life out of everyone. However, all of these countries that are complaining, even the countries that hate America, even the enemies of America, even the people in the Middle East who hate America, they are the ones who live the tyranny in Middle East and go live in the United States, becoming terrorists in the United States, but yet the United States government allows them to stay in the world. They enjoy peace and prosperity and the American dream. Do you understand? Now, do you now see what I'm talking about when we say that it is important for us to protect the global order, to protect the status quo from this global tyranny that Putin wants to bring into the world? And you will see one thing that I want to talk about is this global networks that Putin and Xi are actually bringing about to the world. Let's take a look at Africa. Uh, Putin will have his friends who are African politicians who take over the country or run the country. But as they run the country, they don't run the country for the interest of the people of this nation, but for the interest of Putin and the oligarchs and those black leaders. I'm disappointed by these black leaders because historically, even during the slave trade, it was the black chiefs that were selling their own people to the Arabs and the Europeans. Right now, we've got people like Emerson Mnangagwa who are doing the very same thing, selling our country now to the Russians. And we're seeing it here, even in South Africa, where there's accusations of ANC members getting money from Russia, trading weapons with Russia, and that Russian element when the comrades get Russian money, I don't think they know what they're doing. I don't think that they recognize that as they're getting Russian bribe money, they're actually contributing to bring forward this global tyranny, which is the Antichrist. They do not know that. They just see money. They just get because of corruption. You see how corruption begins to erode society and destroy a country. South Africa is on its path down to the abyss because of ANC corruption. When the companies are given money, they don't think about what is this money going to do. We know that in the ANC, elections are bought. We know that the last one cost 1 billion rand. But the companies do not ask themselves that why is this person paying 1 billion rand for this election? Why do they want to control us? For to whose benefit? But I'll tell you now to whose benefit. To the benefit of the global tyranny, the guys that want to bring about global tyranny. Is it not a coincidence that at one time someone's couches there's a discovery of US dollars, millions of US dollars under someone's couch, and the next moment and then in the next moment we see the Russian invasion in the country. The next moment you see there's this load shedding in the country that is killing South African industries, which means killing the South African economy, which means attacking the South African capitalists who are predominantly white so that they can live, so that they can be poverty in the country, so that who can own the economy? Who else? Yours truly, Russia. Mother Russia controlling South Africa, controlling Zimbabwe, controlling the whole of the African continent so that they can spread this foothold of this Russian influence of Africa in Africa. And that influence doesn't come with help. A lot of African people, of our black brothers, they are so fooled by their leaders. Like I see on the internet the way that they praise Russia. They say Russia is our friend. United States is not our friend. It is very clear to me that Russia is friends with the political class which is pillaging the resources against everybody else in the country. Someone said that Russia is the one who brought liberation in some of these African movements. Of course, Russia sponsored them when the black communist parties were fighting against apartheid and the British rule, French rule in Africa, but they were not doing it so that the black people can be free. They were doing it so that they can even do worse than what the British were doing. I'm beginning to understand, to think that perhaps perhaps the British were right to colonize us, and perhaps the communist movement, like those who were led by Nelson Mandela and our black brothers, were misinformed and ill-advised. Perhaps they should have fought the system in a different way than going through the way of the communism, which really did not, at the end of the day, bring about better livelihood for the black majority, but in fact plunged the lives of black majority into a black rule that is punitive, that is terrible for black people. So we are seeing that in Zimbabwe it is fully pronounced, and we are seeing now we're starting in South Africa. South Africa is on the way of Zimbabwe right now because Vladimir Putin has now had a stronghold. He's having a stronghold in controlling the ANC, and I suppose the comrades in the ANC have got no clue whatsoever of what Putin is doing in South Africa. They just think of Russian money. They are just buying big cars and drinking alcohol, sleeping with girls, but they do not know that they're actually bringing their country to the abyss and contributing to this coming of the Antichrist, who will begin to spread this global tyranny that is going to be characterized by this blatant disregard of human rights, enslaving of the black culture, black people, doing away with all the progress that we have made in the past 100, 200, 300 years. And the ANC brothers do not know that. They do not know that. To them, it's just about the money, the top scale, but at the end of the day, they're bringing their country down. That is now you get some crazy policies of ANC, whereby a country like South Africa, whose interests, whose business interests are in line with the United States, whose business interests benefit from trading with the United States, and at the same time having the Russian and Chinese military, boasting here in Cape Town, trying to tell United States essentially that, you know what, we are with the Russians and the Chinese, and there's nothing we can do about it. And we are here in Cape Town. They didn't even do it in Durban. They do it in Cape Town, which is a very strategic port for global maritime trade. Meaning they're telling that, which means that China, Russia, and South Africa is telling the United States and the Western world that we have got the Cape of Good Hope, that trading route, we have got it covered. We are patrolling those seas, meaning that we can cause a naval blockade there if we want to. I mean, there's only two ways of which shipping can go around to Europe from China or the Middle East. It's either they will go through the Suez Canal in Egypt or through Cape Town. So if Russia, China, and using South Africa, using the ANC through, I mean, now you see why the companies are getting Russian money, because Russians want to use the ANC in South Africa to block the marine trade. I mean, the thing is to control the port of Cape Town. So yet this whole thing works against the national interests of South Africa, the country, works against the economic interests of South Africa, even against the political interests of South Africa. Then you ask yourself, whose interest is the ANC? Look, there's no electricity again. Whose interest is the South African government working for? You will say that yes, they are not South African interests political, they're not South African interests economical, but they're the interests of Putin and the few in the ANC who are part of this thing. The same thing that Putin is doing in Zimbabwe with Emerson Mnangagwa. But our black people don't understand. I see a lot of black people on the internet, that way that they praise Putin. But even Julius Malema, the guy that I support, that I love, he still doesn't understand that Putin is a problem in South Africa. You see, Malema supports ANC's stance of not arresting Putin because he thinks that Putin helped him. No, Malema is a good guy, but on this one, he is misinformed. Okay, I don't think Malema gets Russian money, that the Russian gives money to the ANC. But I think that this time around, because he grew up in the ANC, Julius Malema, and he also I mean, Russia was sponsoring the ANC back then, so he still feels like he's affiliated to the Russians. But he is really come up to a position of understanding that these Russians were not sponsoring them for the sake of black prosperity, but actually for the sake of using the ANC to take the whole of South Africa from the British. So, I mean, progressive leaders like Malema, it would be good if you get to understand that. And if Malema to recognize that, I think he would be the perfect candidate. Him and the EFF were the perfect candidate to take South Africa forward. Because right now, in South Africa, what needs to be done is to figure out what is Ramaphosa's is, connections with the Russians, and the ANC has to come to an understanding that those that Russian pivot is working against the nation of South Africa, and therefore, if the president is willing to go along with the Russians, then ANC has to dump a president, and the new president that needs to come in will have to do first thing and foremost is to do away with all of these Russian agreements, these Russian contracts of patrolling the sea with the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, if it is possible, they need to call the NATO or US Army to patrol Cape Town, both with South African military. Otherwise, if that is not done, when United States and the Western world are pursuing Putin in Africa and making the tighter, I mean, when they send war sanctions to Putin, which means punishing Putin in Africa, they will also set more sanctions to South Africa. So as Putin is going to come to South Africa for his BRICS summit, and South Africa does not arrest him, as South Africa seems to be on the side of this global tyranny, then the Americans have got no choice that to punish South Africa economically, and that will lead to high unemployment, high inflation, and a underperforming economy of South Africa, and that will lead to ANC losing a very huge substantial amount of votes, and with the DA being pro-American and positioning itself to be the savior of South Africa. There will be a time when black people will say, well, we would rather have white people, we would rather have Steenhuisen as the president, because these sanctions, have you ever had sanctions how South Africans are playing? They must look at the Zimbabweans. Zimbabwean sanctions destroyed the whole economy, all because the Zimbabwean government became friends with Russia, who are these antichrists. And if ANC is going through that route, they must not expect that the Americans are going to fold their hands and say, we are afraid of South Africa. No. Washington will impose sanctions on South Africa. Do not play. Do not think that sanctions are only meant for Zimbabweans and not for South Africans. That is when South Africans will learn what it means to be under sanctions. And when that happens, it's either the ANC will keep hold of power the way ZANU-PF keeps hold of power through a tyranny. They will really come out of the closet and become a tyranny and not become a democracy anymore. Or if the democracy prevails in this country because of the multiplicity of forces that are also strong in South Africa as a rainbow nation, then ANC will lose votes, then ANC will get out of power. Who's going to come in there? I do not know. Perhaps the DA, perhaps a coalition of opposition parties, God knows. Now, as well as seeing, I want to go further in explaining that these global tyrants, they are not only finishing here in Africa, they also are very ambitious and they want to express their position even in the United States, project their power in the United States using politicians, pundits, academia in the United States, in the Western world, that are seemingly supportive of Putin's cause, of Chinese cause. They are very, they are the ones who are putting across these arguments that are pro-Russian, with their accolades, whether they were in the U.S. military or they are some geopolitical experts, and they seem to be to polish the image of Putin. But we can see through the whole charade, and it goes all the way to trying to put a candidate in the White House who is willing to work together with these global tyrants that are friends with Vladimir Putin. And there's only one person in the United States political system, Donald Trump, who has on many times admitted that him and Putin are friends, who's very cozy around Putin. He's a guy who says that the dictator in North Korea, Kim Jong Un, is is an interesting guy. There's nothing interesting about Kim Jong Un. That guy, him and his father sponsored, trained the Fifth Brigade that was used by Robert Mugabe to kill people in Matabeleland during the time when I was born. During the time when I was born, North Korea was training Zimbabweans, the Fifth Brigade, to come and kill my people. And Donald Trump thinks that that guy is an interesting guy. There's nothing interesting about Kim Jong Un. He is one of the most terrible dictators around, and his friends with Chinese, friends with the Russians, and Donald Trump is cozy with these people. One wonders what is it that Donald Trump finds attractive in Vladimir Putin. And if we have Donald Trump as the leader of the free world, there you go, folks. You have it. The leader of the free world, the leader, the most powerful man on the whole world, is going to be best friends with Vladimir Putin, who is the Antichrist, who wants to bring about global tyranny. Just think about that. That's a very scary picture. How the Republicans can allow such a travesty to happen in the Republican Party and bring about such debauchery to the American political system and give Americans an opportunity to vote for that and and make Trump their president. Whilst the Republicans, I'm sure the Republicans guys are very clever. They know what I'm talking about. I'm sure they are super clever. They understand what I'm talking about. That when you have got Trump as the president of the United States, you are having the friend of the global east, of the bad guys, best friends of the bad guys, which means Trump is an agent of Putin. Trump is an agent of the forces that are against the forces of good in the world. So having him becoming the president of United States is a travesty. It's gonna be lead to the end of the global order as we know it, and gonna lead to the end of the United States as the police of the world or as the leader of the world. We do know that during his past presidency, Donald Trump used to complain that America is contributing too much to NATO, and he thinks that NATO countries must contribute more than the United States, because Donald Trump does not understand that because the United States contribute more to NATO, contribute more to World Health Organization, contributes more to the IMF and all the other Bretton Woods institution. It's the reason why the United States can project its power and dominance around the world, and therefore these benefits that accrue to the economy of these benefits that accrue to the economy of the United States, owing to the fact that they are the global leaders. But someone did not tell Donald Trump that. Perhaps he knows, but anyway, him and his friends Putin want to change all that. Donald Trump has taken the United States out of the World Health Organization. Donald Trump wants the United States to be pulled out of global leadership. So a Donald Trump presidency, which runs on the platform of making America great again, is in actual fact making America smaller again, making America very irrelevant in the world. And when America becomes irrelevant in the world, and America is no longer the global police, therefore it leaves the space open for China and Russia to contribute in this global tyranny that they seek, and it will appear as if Putin, I mean, Trump is playing his role as an agent of Putin, playing his role at the White House so that he can weaken the United States from within. We know that historically empires have actually fallen from within. Empires are crushed from within. So with Donald Trump as the president of the United States, that would be the United States empire beginning to fall from within through Donald Trump's friendship with Vladimir Putin. And how does Vladimir Putin, when Donald Trump is a president, this is how Vladimir Putin is going to benefit, because Donald Trump is going to pull America from global leadership, which is what Putin and Xi want, and they Putin and Xi will do as he pleases to Europe, will do as he pleases to Africa, Asia, and the whole world. And then they will lead to this global tyranny. While Trump is president, he will be saying that he's focusing on America only to make America great again. But that does not make America great again. That makes America weaker and makes America vulnerable, and make a weak and vulnerable America can easily be attacked by a coalition of China and Russia, and that may bring about the end of the American empire as we know it, bring about an end of the dominance of the global West, and it's going to be replaced by a China, Russia, a leadership, and we know the kind of scary world that is going to come when Xi Jinping runs the whole world. Christians, you can forget your Jesus Christ, because he will ban Christianity all over the world, just like he's banned Christianity in China. LGBTQ, you can forget your flamboyance, because he will ban you and declare you as dog all over the world, just like he has done so in China. Black people, you must as well, you can go back and be called chimpanzees, just like black people are I hated and I discriminated against in Russia and in China. What makes you think that when these guys run the world are going to have a benevolence? They're going to think about all human rights. They're going to think about Malcolm X or all the progress that black people have made. They don't like it. You think they liked it when Barack Obama was the president of the United States, being the most powerful man in the world, a black man? Do you think that they liked that? No, they do not like that. They're going to reverse all of that. So whatever place you are, whatever minority you are, whatever kind of previously oppressed people you are, with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping leading the world, then you know that all of your rights are going to be reversed. That this is the spirit of the Antichrist that the Bible talks about. So therefore, be very much aware, even if you're an American voter, know very well that as you are voting for Donald Trump, I know in America they seem to be touring the party line. Republicans will always vote for a Republican candidate without vetting that candidate to see if really is good for them, but they just vote because that guy is Republican. This is the time when the Republican voters need to be conscious of the fact that we are not voting for this guy only because he's Republican, but we need to check and see how does that affect the globe, not just America. As far as I'm seeing it, as a non-American, it is not my interest to participate in the inner workings of the American political system. But however, if the inner workings of the American political system has got a very strong bearing on my circumstances as a resident or citizen of the world, such that it warrants my participation in American politics, so shall I be uh, obliged or forced or forced to bring up my voice to let the Americans know that as they vote for Donald Trump, they are voting for a friend of the global tyrant who was going to be aiding this global tyrant to bring this global hegemony of the of the Chinese and the Russians. However, as far as other policies that Donald Trump has, it's up to the Americans to argue about abortion policies or whatever, LGBTQ rights or pro or whatever other policies that they have is got to do with them. But this one that the Republican, the front runner, which is Donald Trump, has got close ties with Russia and thinks that Kim Jong Un is an interesting fellow, and he has got such a cozy relationship with these Russians that it is so scary, and it makes us wonder that as he lead the world, will it be possible that he will make aid Russia to end up having this stronghold in global leadership? And it is possible that he will do that, because we've seen in the previous 4 years as president where he began to pull the United States from most of these global established associations or institutions that held the hegemony of the United States. Therefore, by doing so, he knows that him and the Russians know that as the United States pulls itself from global leadership, there will be nobody else to fill that vacuum except for China and Russia. And that is what Russia wants in a Trump presidency in the United States of America. So Republicans, do the right thing, choose a different guy to be on the Republican ticket, or perhaps try to educate Trump to understand what is at stake. If he can be educated, is good, but if he is already part of these guys, there's nothing you can do about it except for hope that a democratic candidate will win the 2024 elections. Good night.